Welcome to the University of Texas at Tyler. I'm Scott Braddock, and this is the, for lack of a better title, CSCOPE Debate. Thanks so much for coming out tonight. This is a really interesting debate. I, over the years, have moderated a lot of events that are sort of similar to this, but I think, Dan, you would appreciate this, that it just sort of organically grew from your Facebook page, and Mr. Ratliff saying, well, you know, if Dan wants to debate anybody, anytime, anywhere, then he'll be the anybody. We figured out the anytime and anywhere. That's here right now. I'm at the Quorum Report. So that's a website in Austin that covers politics and policy. We're actually celebrating 30 years of doing that, quorumreport.com. I want to lay out the rules for you for what's going to happen here. And again, this just sort of organically came about, so we've had to figure out how to do this in a fair way because people are, as you know, very interested in this. I talked to a woman who came from California, all the way from the West Coast. Just, there she is.
They said they can't hear in the back, I don't think, Scott.
Can you not hear us?
Yeah.
Is that any better? Is that better? All right. Yeah, a woman drove all the way from California just for this, so there is a lot of interest, as you know. So moderating something like this will be tough. I'm wearing stripes. That's because I'm a referee up here. I'm okay being the least popular guy on the stage at the end of the night, but what I'm not okay with is not having a real public policy debate between these two gentlemen who are two of the top education officials in our state, the chairman of the State Education Committee in the Senate and the vice chair of the Board of Education, Tom Ratliff and Dan Patrick. We're also joined here on stage by a couple of women who are going to, and very knowledgeable women who are going to join in the questioning here. One of them to my left here, and she's almost never at anybody's left, but this is Joanne Fleming. Just to your right. She's the executive director of Grassroots America, We the People, and to my right is Marianne Whitaker, the superintendent of the Hudson ISD. And a big round for all four of them. Here's how we're going to try to do this in a fair way. These women each have brought 4 questions that they have thought very long and hard about exactly what they're going to ask. They will get to ask one of the two gentlemen the question. That gentleman will have 2 minutes to answer. Then there will be a 1-minute rebuttal from the other. And then after that, a 3-minute discussion period where kind of everybody can join in. Again, that's why the stripes. So with that, we're going to go straight to Marianne for the first question. And the first thing we're going to do right before that question is we're going to have an opening statement from each of the gentlemen. And at my discretion, since you had to pick on me, I'll let Dan go first.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. I want to dispel a few myths right away. This is not a political event. In fact, some people in politics said, Dan, this is a dumb thing for you to do. Since you're involved in a campaign, you don't get to debate against someone you're not running against. I'm here tonight as the chairman of education, representing the taxpayers, the school districts, the teachers, the principals, the superintendents, and most importantly, who's been left out of this discussion, the students in the classroom. This should not be a between adults. The number one issue should be, regardless of which side you're on in this debate, is what's best for the students. And as chairman of education, I had a number of concerned parents come to me last fall about some issues with CSCOPE. And I looked into it, and I had some concerns. And all I promised them was that the first hearing we would have would be on CSCOPE. And wherever the evidence would take us, let it take us. Might have been just one hearing and nothing to it. But that wasn't the case. Every week and every month, we learn more things about CSCOPE that disturb me. And others. Let me read you someone who's not an extremist, and that's the Attorney General of Texas, Greg Abbott, who has sent a letter to the state auditor of his concerns. And some of their concerns, you hear about CSCOPE as a private nonprofit and should be protected, unlike governmental bodies. But after a meeting in my office with his staff and CSCOPE board, the Attorney General's office is very concerned of where millions of dollars potentially went. As a threshold matter, representatives from the ESC stated it was the ESCs themselves, not the TESCC, that contracted with the vendor and submitted payments to the vendor for the services rendered. That fact means that public tax dollars were involved. Millions, without contracts, without proper bidding. And I don't care which side of the issue you're on, again on this issue. As taxpayers, as educators, as parents, you need to be concerned about what happened to millions of dollars that were spent between 2008 and 2010, and maybe longer, and why weren't contracts written. You should be concerned that we were paying 3 times as much for online services than needed to be spent, a fact that the new board found out and discontinued to work with the first company. You should also be concerned that the Texas Code for parents says very clearly that a parent is entitled to review all teaching materials, instructional materials, and other teaching aids. That's the parent's right. No one should want to support a program that hid everything behind a wall where you needed a password to get in, which was against the law, where the chairman that he serves with of the State Board of Education, Barbara Cargill, needed 6 months to get a password, where I, as a legislator, had to get a password to see what parents under the law are entitled to. No one, forget CSCOPE. This is a bigger issue than CSCOPE. It may be CSCOPE today, but we are progressing to online learning in America and getting away from textbooks as technology moves forth. Every person should be concerned what's in the classroom and what their students are learning. And as soon as you see CSCOPE or some other company say, you know what, you really can't see what's there. We're going to hide it. You need a password. And when parents ask to get it, some parents were charged as much as $700 to see what they should have gotten for free. And the Attorney General says, if school districts keep doing that, they're going to hear from me. This is bigger than a lesson plan. This is bigger than calling Tea Party patriots terrorists and arguing that. This is about an entity that was set up illegally, in my view. This is an entity that spent millions of dollars of taxpayer money that are unaccounted for. That's why I called for a state audit, and it begins next month. And this is about the quality of lesson plans in our classroom, so we give the best to our students. And everyone should be concerned. And that's where the evidence took us, and that's why we were concerned, and that's why we're here tonight. Thank you very much.
Mr. Ratliff?
Thank you. Senator Patrick's right. Over the past weeks and months, we have learned a lot about CSCOPE. Unfortunately, most of it's not true. And what I want to do tonight is to have a factual, thoughtful, and detailed discussion about the truth. And in the interest of transparency, I have launched a Dropbox online that anybody in the public can go look at. And everything I've got up here tonight with me is on that Dropbox. Grade my paper. Check my facts. Many of the things Senator Patrick just told you just aren't true. And so I hope we can get through that tonight. And so the biggest challenge... One of the biggest challenges we've got is the misinformation. One of the other biggest challenges we've got is many things are being blamed on CSCOPE that are not CSCOPE's responsibility. CSCOPE covers things in their lessons because the State Board of Education requires them to, and requires every public school to cover those same things. We've got to stop shooting the messenger. Kind of like the big billboard out here that they don't like what I'm going to say, so they want to try to impeach me. Let's talk about the facts. Keep it up, Ginger. Yeah. So go to Dropbox.com, log in with debate@thomasratliff.com, and the password is CSCOPE, all caps. And as I answer questions tonight, I'm going to refer to tab 1, tab 2, tab 22, and I want you to go there and look at what I'm referring to. Look at the facts. And since he got into a couple of specifics, let's just talk about the first one. The fact that they've called for an audit, the way he says it implies that they're already guilty. We have due process in this country. We have an innocent until proven guilty model in this country. And just because somebody's being investigated doesn't imply anything. I support a state auditor review. I supported a sunset review before we postponed it for 4 years. Let's find out the truth. Find out the facts. The fact that he calls CSCOPE created an illegal nonprofit entity. Well, I've got a letter behind tab 8 dated July 14th, 2009 from the Secretary of State's office, Hope Andrade, granting that nonprofit status. Behind that, I've got the letter from the Internal Revenue Service granting that nonprofit status. A 2012 AG opinion letter from Greg Abbott, the same Attorney General, talks about how CSCOPE can keep these lessons away from the Public Information Act because they compete with other vendors. Greg Abbott said it in 2012. This year he came back and clarified and said, but make no mistake, parents can see anything and everything. And he's right, and I support that 100%. Chapter 26 of the Education Code has the parents' rights and responsibilities. If you're not a parent, the law says you're not entitled to the same information. That's just what the law says. The school district that wanted to charge $700 was Collinsville ISD. They offered to give all the information to be viewed for free, but the parent wanted copies. I personally don't want a school district giving somebody 10,000 copies for free. I want them educating kids, not being a copy machine for somebody that wants to look at this stuff. If you want to look at it, great. So with that, as a show of good faith, at the end of the evening, I'm going to give my notebook to Senator Patrick so he can have what I have. He can check my facts. He can compare it to the Dropbox. I'm a no surprises guy. I believe in transparency, and that's why I'm doing what I'm doing tonight. Thank you.
Again, with the unpopularity for me, from this, and fine so far, but from this point forward, let's keep our emotions in check, because I know it's going to get throughout the evening a little heated. I expect that. But let's keep the audience reactions to a minimum from this point forward, and then you'll be able to go wild again at the end. I promise you. All right. So with that, and great opening statements from both gentlemen, let's go now to Mary Ann Whitaker, the superintendent of the Hudson ISD.
Thank you. Senator Patrick, you have stated on several occasions the Texas Tribune reviewed all of CSCOPE's 877 schools and found the students attending those schools using CSCOPE lessons performed worse on the STAR exams than students who didn't attend schools that used CSCOPE lessons. I'm in possession of 2 dissertations, Merit, August 2011, Spin, May 2012, both reporting CSCOPE had a statistically significant effect on increasing the passing percentages of students in school districts that utilize the product and outperformed similar school districts that did not use the product. Both provided key findings that CSCOPE is a tightly aligned, guaranteed and viable curriculum essential for student success in education, where high-stakes exams are used as a central measure of student performance and accountability. One of the major benefits is that the curriculum is aligned to the Texas Essential Knowledge and Skills, and that it will ensure all Texas academic standards are covered prior to the test. Senator Patrick, who performed that study that stated CSCOPE schools performed worse on the STAR exams, and what were the specific findings?
Good to see you again. We served on that committee together during the off session 2 years ago. First of all, it was the Texas Tribune. I don't work for the Tribune. I don't know their independent study. They don't print things that are false. Number 2, on my way here today, there's no reason for the Texas Tribune to print a false study. Number 2, on my way here today, I spoke to E.W. Burton, who's a business teacher in Blanket, Texas. A student raised his hand and said, "What's CSCOPE?" Didn't have an axe to grind, didn't have a point of view on it, wanted to know. And so they did a study, business class, and they looked at every school district in the state, not a sample, but every school district in the state that didn't use CSCOPE and every school district in the state that did use CSCOPE. And these students, not the perfect study, but 30% of them did poor. I'm sorry, let me correct that. Students who were in CSCOPE performed 1/3 less than the students without CSCOPE. Now, I know that Mr. Ratliff has already asked for those studies and asked for that report. This is just a 9th grade business teacher out there. And these students trying to do a quality, wait a minute, are you laughing at your teachers? Are you laughing at your students trying to do good work? But there are, and I'm happy to look at your studies, and you can take any study and say, well, I'm looking at this, I'm looking at on the retest, I'm looking on special demographics, that how did Hispanic students do, how did a certain, I don't know what their studies are, okay? But what we do know What we do know is that we had testimony on the record by the chairman of the SBOE, the State Board of Education, who said we had failed math lessons, flawed math lessons, flawed science. She's a science teacher, so I guess she's wrong too. That we have social study lessons that everyone has seen on the front pages. Is that what you want your students in the 5th and 6th grade to do, design communist flags for countries? Is that where we're going? All I ask is, don't come in applauding him because you think he's right, and don't come in applauding me because you think I'm right. Come in with an open mind and say, wait a minute, what is this program all about? Why was it behind a wall? Why did I need a password to see it? Why? Why? And when Mr. Ratliff says my facts are wrong, so the education code is wrong? Okay? Is the Attorney General's letter wrong? That he has concerns? No? So what facts did I have wrong? When I talk about a company...
That's about 2 minutes. That's a perfect time for him to rebut, since you're asking him a question. Go ahead, Mr. Ratliff.
If you look behind tab 19, you'll see an email from Morgan Smith, who works for the Texas Tribune, who says simply, we performed no such study. What was done was a 9th grade class looked at the database on the Texas Tribune website and did a survey, not a study, a survey of test scores in CSCOPE schools and non-CSCOPE schools. No analysis, no regression analysis, no nothing. So we're basing public policy for 5 million kids based on a spreadsheet from the 9th grade class, when we have 2 doctoral thesis projects that say the exact opposite. Behind tab 11, there are emails from the superintendent of Tyler ISD with the test scores in 2007, the year before CSCOPE, the test scores in 2011, 3 years, 4 years after CSCOPE. Test scores were up across the board, period, no exception. Behind tab 19, there's also a bar chart from the superintendent in Llano, where I think you were just last week.
Right.
He shows that after 3 years of implementing CSCOPE, test scores are up across the board. I applaud that teacher for wanting to teach those kids how to build a spreadsheet. But I'm not going to base policy for 5 million kids based on a spreadsheet from 9th graders.
All right, this is going to be interesting. This will be our first 3-minute discussion. What do you want to jump in with on that?
I want to go back, and I want to follow up also to the original comment about how CSCOPE was formed. This is important, folks, unless you don't care about your tax dollars. A public entity cannot take tax dollars to form a company. And that's what happened here. The first question I asked when we had the CSCOPE hearing on January 31st, because they'd made a big case of, we operate like any other business. And I said, do you have an address? No. Do you have a phone number? No. Do you have a checkbook? No. So who's running this nonprofit business that he got an IRS certification after 2 years? People paid with tax dollars. We have people, public employees, running a private business. And we will be challenging that IRS grant, by the way. We will be challenging all of this. It's the heart of who we are as a government. You cannot turn a blind eye and say, it's all right. It's all right that we take taxpayer money, form a private business, we don't have an address, we don't have anything. You couldn't find someone who worked at CSCOPE. It didn't exist.
Mr. Ratliff, do you want to jump into this?
TESCCC did not exist. Did not exist.
The question was, does CSCOPE enhance or hurt academic performance? He's pointing to a 9th grade spreadsheet. I'm pointing to an email from a superintendent right here in Tyler, the superintendent at Llano that just successfully defended himself against a frivolous lawsuit, and 2 doctoral theses, one done by a private Christian university known as Baylor University, the other one done at Texas Tech University, my alma mater, and a Tier 1 university. The facts are clear if you look at the facts. CSCOPE does not impair, but it enhances student performance when districts use it right.
And my response to that is very clear. You have presented 2 studies that most people have not yet seen. We will look at their analysis, and we will have, if I have to privately fund it, we will have an equal study from people at that same level. But what I'm suggesting here tonight is, when these lessons were written, and it took us a long time to find out who wrote the lessons by this illegally formed company, there was never any check, outside independent body looking at these lessons. In testimony this year, I asked, did anyone over 6 years look at these lessons and evaluate them? And the answer was no.
Only hundreds of thousands of teachers in the classroom.
And Mr. Ratliff, and teachers who overwhelmingly reject being told what to do every minute of every day in the classroom. Teachers who would like to write their own lesson plans. Teachers who, and maybe this fact is wrong too, in the original contract signed by this illegally formed company, spending millions of dollars, allegedly of taxpayer money, and we'll find out in the audit. You know what the contract was that the teachers had to sign? Right here. If you disclose, remember the education code, folks. Parents, by law, are guaranteed to see the instructional materials. What the contract said was, teacher, you face criminal penalties. You could go to jail or be sued if you show parents the lessons that I'm teaching.
And Senator, I'll give you credit where credit's due. Your efforts have resulted in the rewriting of that contract.
After 6 years.
I'm trying to give you credit. If you don't want it, that's fine.
I'm happy to take my credit. But what about the teachers for 6 years, Thomas?
Tab 17 has the previous version of the subscriber agreement and the new version, and it's abundantly clear. Parents can see it all. Now, as of earlier this week, the Texas Tribune website now has all the lessons online, so not just parents, but anybody, maybe other states will look at it and see how good Cscope is and follow Texas's lead once again in public schools.
All right, we're going to move on to our next question.
Oh, okay. We'll follow on.
We'll come back to that, I'm sure. Joanne Fleming, what's the next?
Mr. Ratliff, with the NSA issues in the news, people are more concerned than ever about privacy. Parents are rightfully concerned about data mined by schools and then used to track or profile their children. Cscope is a computer-based service capable of gathering personally identifiable information on Texas students. Contracted vendors are located outside the state of Texas. In Friday's Longview News Journal story, you were described as being puzzled over concerns of data mining. A recent amendment to the Federal Family Education Rights and Privacy Act indeed allows third parties to gain access to student data without parental consent. As our elected State Board of Education member, do you know for certain that there is absolutely no sharing of information about Texas public school students with third-party vendors or quasi-federal agencies through Cscope or other means? If that is the case, please cite upon what controlling legal authority or statute that you ensure us that Texas students are protected from such data sharing and profiling. And I would remind you here that if the federal government didn't know that it could get the data from Texas public schools, why would there be an exception to that law?
Mr. Ratliff.
Yeah, thank you for the question. There's no way in the world I can guarantee anything in 1,000 school districts with hundreds of thousands of teachers and 5 million kids. To try to even do so is laughable. What I do know is the only people that have username and passwords in Cscope are teachers. Children are not given, students are not given electronic access to Cscope. If they are given electronic access to the lessons, that's done by the teacher or that district. Cscope contains zero student data. So this is yet another example of the misinformation designed to scare you and you about your kids in the public schools. It's just not true. So I don't know what the NSA is doing or not doing or what other vendors are doing, but
Mr. Ratliff, I'm getting a couple of notes from people listening online. That some people listening online are having a little trouble hearing us. We get a little closer to the mic.
Okay. How's this?
We'll do mic technique here.
Let me say it again real, because this is an important one, because this is putting fear in the hearts of parents unnecessarily. Cscope only allows electronic access by teachers. Students do not have electronic access to Cscope. Any fears or accusations of data mining are false, and it's fear-mongering designed to scare parents. And that's one of the biggest misinformations that just popped up last week in the Longview paper. And they quoted Mason Moses from the CSCOPE Collaborative that said the same thing I'm saying. Students do not have electronic access to Cscope, period.
Senator, I think Mr. Ratliff didn't realize he'd be on stage with two radio guys. Got the mic technique down. All right. What do you think?
Not a problem. First of all, I didn't think the government was eavesdropping on my telephone. I didn't know the IRS was going after good conservative Tea Party groups and citizens. I didn't know the government was reading my email. And so while, Thomas, I agree, at this point in time, there's no evidence of that, I'm very concerned about the future. And that is why we are looking at this whole online learning process. Because we're getting away from textbooks, as you know, and going online. We have to have checks and balances of what's in our classrooms. Students have to have the best educational materials, and parents have to know what's being taught. And I continue to stand here, and you gloss over the fact that for 6 years we had a program that we know. Again, I'm going back to the facts. You can have your Dropbox, and you can have any article you want. But the facts are the facts, that public entities cannot begin nonprofit or for-profit businesses. And when I asked the question, did you ask the legislature for permission? They said no. Did you ask the Attorney General for an opinion? No. Did you ask a private lawyer? Yes. Do you have an opinion? No. You should be concerned about that as a steward of our tax dollars and our education. You should be concerned that for 6 years teachers could go to jail if they showed a parent what they were teaching them. You should be concerned that CSCOPE for 6 years was violating the law by putting what parents were entitled to have for free behind a passcode protected wall. You seem to act as if that's all fine.
Well, I, as a parent, was never denied access to anything in my child's classroom, and I have 2 students in my family that attend a CSCOPE school today. Never once been denied access.
Wait a minute. Back up. When did you get a password?
I never asked for one. That's not my job.
Okay.
My job is to set standards and to trust teachers to do that.
Well,
When your students...
Senator, this is the discussion part now, so let me jump in for a second. And Joanne's saying that you're not really answering, or neither one of you are answering the question, but let me throw one thing in, which is, you say that Mr. Ratliff says that he's acting as if things are fine, but he did say that he would give you credit for having pressed and got some things changed. So it's not really saying that he was fine with those things. He's saying it's good that they changed.
No, he said he'd give me credit for getting the teachers off the hook for going to jail.
Right. He did not say that's fine.
But what he did acknowledge is that CSCOPE was set up inappropriately with public tax dollars. What he hasn't acknowledged is that the Attorney General has concerns about how millions of dollars were spent. He says, oh, we'll have an audit. Everything with CSCOPE is after the fact. When we would come up with a failed lesson or a flawed lesson, they would say, oh, we took that down. That's an old lesson. Every time we caught their hand in the cookie jar, oh, we stopped doing that. And remember, folks, CSCOPE was taken out of the schools, not by legislation, but by the CSCOPE board of an 18-2 vote on their own because they realized what a mess it was for students. They, on their own, took that. I didn't have the votes to pass that bill. And in terms of Joanne's question, I thought I responded. If I didn't, I apologize.
Joanne, what was
help
the part
better
of it that you
understand the
didn't
question?
think was being answered?
I'll be happy to help both of you
Sure.
gentlemen,
Sure.
because I know you want to answer my question.
Sure.
So let me
I thought we
kind
did, but
of
go
take
ahead.
you through this. First of all, students don't have to have access to CSCOPE for that data to be mined, okay? It can come through the teacher's evaluation of the student and then the school district's overall profile of the student. So let me read this to you again. A recent amendment to the Federal Family Education Rights and Privacy Act allows third parties to gain access to student data without parental consent. Now, this has to do with the Recovery Act and the federal stimulus funds, which Texas took those funds, okay? So I'm trying to get you all to focus on this. The federal government says we can access this data, and Texas took the federal funds, so that means the federal government must be expecting Texas public schools to share information with them. So I'm saying if it's not through CSCOPE, if it's through another means, you, Senator Patrick, as chairman of the Senate Education Committee, and you, Mr. Ratliff, as our representative on the State Board of Education, I, as a taxpayer and a parent, are asking you to assure us, and if you can't assure us then that should be on your to-do list, both of you, to assure us that we are not having our children tracked. So please focus on, do you or do you not know whether that is true?
I'm going to have each of you respond to that briefly, but I would say, in fairness, he said that he can't do that. He did answer your question. He said that he can't do that. So Mr. Ratliff, go ahead and respond to that.
And I did say that CSCOPE, teachers take lessons off of CSCOPE and print them out and hand them to students. So unless there's a Xerox machine in the sky that I'm unaware of that takes those and mines that data, I can't tell you what the federal government does or does not do. My job on the State Board of Education is to pass standards and approve instructional materials. That's it, as it pertains to the classroom. I don't think Senator Patrick could guarantee you what the federal government's doing or not doing.
What do you think, Senator?
No, and I tried, Joanne, I wasn't trying to avoid your question. What I was suggesting is that as of today, I'm not aware, and if there is something that we need to be aware of, we will learn it. But as of today, I'm not aware that there's data that they can mine. But what I also said was, I'm not going to turn a blind eye to it and say, you know what, this is just fine. You know, the federal government's never going to look into our child's records. I'm very concerned based on what we just learned in the last 60 days about what the federal government is doing. So I think we need to be sure that doesn't happen. But as of today, I don't believe it's happening as of today, but we should protect it so it never happens.
And I agree with that 100%, especially because I've got 2 children in public school and I don't want their data mined either. So if it's happening, let's shut it down.
All right. On to question number 2. I'm moving. One from each. All right. Question number 2 from Mary Ann. Go ahead.
Senator, you have endorsed the attack against CSCOPE, claiming CSCOPE is not transparent, inaccessible to parents, anti-Christian, pro-Muslim, anti-American, and secretly integrating the Common Core in our classrooms. As you know, 45 of the states have adopted the Common Core. Therefore, all nationally published educational materials are aligned with the Common Core. Purchasing systems such as Eduphoria, Edgate, McDougall-Littell, Harcourt, Pearson, to name a few, cannot be a sole source for any Texas schools any longer. All school districts have to depend on teacher-created lesson plans to ensure that our TEKs are taught. If you were to review plans in your non-CSCOPE districts, I have no doubt you would find some very comparable activities. As an example, the state standard states that we must offer an in-depth study of world religions, the beliefs and influences of those religions on the culture, as well as the economy. If taken out of context, the following 2 activities, which I will give you, found in one of your district's locally developed curriculum, could be attacked based on the very reasoning of our CSCOPE lesson. The first activity, quoted from one of your curriculum documents in one of your senatorial district school districts. Students are to create a religion of their own from each of the major religions. What parts would they borrow from each of the major faiths? A second example is, students are to create a visual that identifies the 5 pillars of Islam and explain how faith, prayer, alms, fasting during Ramadan, and a pilgrimage to Mecca applies to Muslims today. Senator Patrick, the non-CSCOPE districts all have password-protected curriculum documents, lesson plans, not accessible to parents. They utilize national products that are aligned to the Common Core they select, have lesson plans created by practicing classroom teachers. They require teachers to follow the locally developed curriculum, and they will be allowed to continue developing local lessons without SBOE overview or oversight. As a conservative, please justify your role in being responsible for government intrusion into teacher-created CSCOPE lesson plans, usurping local control, targeting communities of small, mid-sized, rural school districts, which are the majority of CSCOPE, and not attacking the urban-suburban districts or private vendors that offer comparable activities.
I have to work my way back to the beginning of the question. the issue is not teaching the religions of the world. That wasn't the issue, whether it was CSCOPE or not CSCOPE. The evidence that we had in the committee, and I can only base it on when we had people come to testify, is that there was a preponderance of lesson on Islam in some CSCOPE schools compared to Christianity. We had the lesson plan with us, and if I were comparing it in thickness, here are the other religions, and here was Islam. And please understand that, again, what's missing here is seems to be this fight and sometimes attack against parents who have a right to ask a question. They have a right to ask a question. They have a right as a parent to ask the superintendent and the principal and the teacher, why are we teaching this? Do you not think that it's as if we're living in this world of, we're going to have this curriculum, you can't see it, but trust us that it's great for your students, and that there's not any bias in that lesson or any intent in that lesson that would be anti-American, anti-Texan, would be environmentalist favorite and against the oil industry. I could take you through the lessons. There are 80 lesson plans just for social studies in first grade and kindergarten under CSCOPE. That's why we passed Senate Bill 1406, so that we could begin the process of looking at these lessons. I'm not sitting here saying every lesson plan in CSCOPE was terrible, and I'm not suggesting every lesson plan outside of CSCOPE is perfect. But what I am suggesting is I don't understand this drink the Kool-Aid CSCOPE mentality that we don't care if there's anything wrong with CSCOPE. We just want our CSCOPE. I had a superintendent testify, and we gave him fact after fact after fact, and he said, well, lessons can be wrong. He didn't seem to care. Superintendent, everyone that we had before our committee, didn't know the contracts that they had even signed. The board members for CSCOPE that testified didn't know what was in the lesson plans. It took us forever to find out who wrote the lesson plans. I mean, aren't you concerned who's writing these lesson plans? And is there a bias? There might not be. Could there be a bias? Every teacher has a bias. My wife, who's here, elementary school teacher, she wrote her own lesson plans. Every teacher's going to be different. We have 1,100 school districts, and we have 300,000 teachers. We can't see everything, but my responsibility is not to take the side of the parent, who might be wrong, or not to take the side of the superintendent, who might be wrong. My job is to find out what the truth is and where it lies. And that's what we've always tried to do in that committee. And when I started, I was a person alone. At the end of the day, our bills passed, if not unanimously, overwhelmingly, by Republicans and Democrats in rural areas and suburban areas and urban areas. Mr. Ratliff and others seem to try to say, this is a Dan Patrick issue. I just happened to be the guy here when the world went round on this issue. But I was not alone at the end of the day. And again, CSCOPE itself said these lesson plans need to be pulled down.
And that's not my question, sir. My question is, why are you just focusing on CSCOPE and not the non-CSCOPE districts that have comparable lesson plans?
And I answered the question because that's the issue that parents brought us. That's the issue. No one brought us. We didn't have any parents coming to us on non-CSCOPE lesson plans. We had parents that came to us and they were concerned about how this was set up, how taxpayer money was used, about specific lesson plans.
Senator, that's the concern.
That's the answer.
The parents brought, and that seems to be what a lot of people keep coming back to, Mr. Ratliff, is the lack of transparency. A lot of people that I've talked to haven't focused on what necessarily the specific content was, whether it was about this deal with the socialist flag or the
it was the lack of transparency.
It was the fact that they couldn't get to the information they wanted to get to. What would you say about that?
Well, first let me address the question. Tab 0 on the Dropbox has the old social studies standards and the new social studies standards. It also has the scope and sequence document from Klein ISD in Senator Patrick's district, showing that a non-CSCOPE school district teaches about Islam, teaches about Judaism, teaches about Buddhism, teaches about socialism, fascism, communism. It's not just CSCOPE schools. The reason my social studies has 80 lessons, it's because the State Board of Education required 80 lessons. This is a problem created by the previous State Board of Education prior to my arrival. Our TEKs are too long. Our standards are too long. This is not a CSCOPE problem. It's a State Board of Education problem that we're blaming on CSCOPE.
Are we in discussion?
We're into the transparency. You asked about the transparency. Mission accomplished. You have done a wonderful job of getting the subscriber agreement rewritten. You've asked that the lessons be placed online, and so now they're in the public domain for free, and they are 100% transparent. It's the most transparent curriculum in the state of Texas. I'll give credit where credit's due. That's because of your involvement. Now you need to stop and back away and let local communities take it from here.
Don't suggest that this is a local issue. When we have minutes and documents from CSCOPE board meetings that they want to make this not only a statewide curriculum, but might even sell it out of state. This has nothing to do. And let me tell you what local control is. You know what local control is?
I'd love to hear it.
A parent making a decision for their child. That's local control. Local control,
I agree on that.
the local control is when the parents elect school board members who sign a contract with the superintendent. That's local control. And I want to go back to this issue. I appreciate that you recognize the work that the committee did. And by the way, this was not the legislators who accomplished this. This were the hard-working people in the community who put hundreds of hours researching where we wouldn't have the time and couldn't have the time to do it, who brought us the information that almost always turned out to be accurate. Almost always turned out to be accurate.
And it's not.
No, you can sit here, Mr. Ratliff, and make these glittering generality statements. You're just wrong. And you can have the biggest Dropbox and all the documents you want. You're just wrong.
Senator, in terms of generalities versus specifics, I think we've been pretty clear of who's being general and who's not.
Hang on, gentlemen, 1 second. Ms. Whitaker, do you feel your question's being answered now by the Senator?
I think it's answered to the best of his ability, so.
All right, well, that's all right.
Well, let me be sure. Let me be sure you hear me through. No, wait a minute. If she does not feel, I'm not going to let her make that comment. When you say the best of my ability, let me be very clear. We didn't have parents from school districts without CSCOPE coming to us with reams of documents that they were concerned about. We did not have parents in schools without CSCOPE who said they couldn't see the lesson plans or the instructional materials. And that's why we investigated CSCOPE. And it could have been one hearing, but it was amazing. The board of directors who came that day couldn't answer one question. And that led to another hearing. And members on that committee, and you know many of those senators who came in there thinking, what is CSCOPE all about? What is Dan having this hearing for? Left unanimously shaking their head that this was a group of people either negligent or clueless. But they didn't know what was in the schools. They didn't know how the company was formed. They didn't know where their money was going. They didn't know what contracts were saying. They didn't know anything. And for some reason, Mr. Ratliff and others who support CSCOPE seem to be okay with that. And no one should be okay with that.
We're going to move on to our next. This is where I get to be unpopular. That's fine. We're going to move on to our next question from Joanne.
Senator Patrick, when everyone thought CSCOPE had been banned from further use, all across the state we heard from school superintendents and administrators of schools that they could be starting from ground zero, and were even asking for waivers from accountability ratings for the 2013-2014 school year. In the context of the classroom teacher, let me reiterate that. I have a reason for asking it this way. In the context of the classroom teacher and not administrators, what is your response to these claims?
Well, first of all, let's put in perspective that we have about 838 districts. I guess that's not about. Over 800 districts that have 1,600 students, 2,000 students or less. And about a third of those districts, by the way, have never used CSCOPE lesson plans. And they're doing just fine. In fact, most of the educators, many of you here tonight, were really excited about HB 5 because we reduced STAR tests from 15 to 5 and we put more flexibility in the 4x4. So we believe in local control. But suddenly, we were not happy about this issue. And so now, as Joanne says, the CSCOPE, again, not the legislature, because we didn't have the votes to do it, on their own took out the lesson plans, and you would have thought the sky was falling, they wouldn't be able to go to school after Labor Day. You know, first of all, there are other vendors, number one. Number two, teachers welcome writing their own lesson plans. Number three, Mr. Ratliff, being very clever, sends a letter to all of my school districts telling my superintendents what a mess I've created. And he wants to personally inspect their lesson plans. He wants to inspect to see if they're up to snuff for his districts to use. Because one of the things I suggested was that small school districts could partner with like small school districts who weren't using CSCOPE, or they could partner with mid-sized or large districts. And all of my school districts said, we're happy to share. We've already been sharing. There was no need for the sky to fall with these districts and say, what are we going to do, Joanne? So 25 asked for a waiver, and 25 were turned down. This issue was settled and it was done until one lawyer, answering a question that he asked in an SBO meeting, said, well, now that they're public domain, yes, schools could use them. And that will be fought out in the courts at some point. It's an intellectual property rights issue. But there's a difference between you have a right to do something and is it the right thing to do? We know that parents have questions and concerns. We know that the majority of teachers don't like it. We know we've had testimony from teacher after teacher who said the lessons were flawed. We have questions about the illegality of the organization. We had the state auditor at the Attorney General of the state of Texas suggestion that we look into where millions of dollars were spent without contracts. All of these issues that Mr. Ratliff and I appreciated. This isn't personal between us. It really isn't. It isn't for me. I don't send Twitter feeds out attacking citizens and parents for asking questions, or him, and I don't post anything on Facebook saying anything negative about anyone who supports CSCOPE. What I'm asking the people who support CSCOPE is to at least take a deep breath and say, wait a minute. Wait a minute. Shouldn't we take a look at what our students are learning? Shouldn't we take a look at how this was formed and why? And you said earlier, Mr. Ratliff, that you've never needed a password to go in and look at these lessons. Again, when did you get a password? Do you have a password?
If I do, it's to my knowledge. I never requested one.
Okay.
I've never gone to look at CSCOPE.
Okay,
Can
I have 10 seconds?
No, because we're going to have him jump in here. These are the rules we all.
All right, we'll follow up.
All right, so we'll follow up with that. Go ahead, Joe.
Okay, so you said a quote that said, a lawyer, a few supporters, and Mr. Ratliff have tried to renege on the deal and to resurrect this program. I've got the letter that the Regional Service Center signed dated May 17th. I don't see my signature, any teacher, any superintendent, or anybody from the Texas Education Agency that signed this deal. How can we renege on something we weren't a part of to begin with, Senator?
The ESCs, 18-2, voted to stop the lesson plan.
School districts don't report to the ESCs.
Yes, I understand that.
So if they want to keep using a tool that's now in the public domain,
And
how
that's
do they
what
renege?
part, Mr. Ratliff, that the lawsuit will be about, is using a product that last year you were licensing and paying a fee for, and now using it at no cost because you suggest one lawyer says it's public domain. That will be a fight in the courts, and that may take years to play itself out. It's not the first time that a lawyer has stood up and said, I have a different view, and takes an issue the legislature has dealt with, we thought successfully, and put it to bed.
And
But
not just the lawyer, but the general counsel of the Texas Education Agency,
Let me
who
go
probably
back.
knows that code better than any lawyer in the state.
I want to go back. I want to go back. So you haven't had a password. So all these months you've been defending the lesson plans of CSCOPE, you've never even looked at them, have you?
I've defended local districts' ability to make that choice for themselves, not you make it for them.
And let me tell you something,
But have you looked at them?
No, I've looked at a few. I've looked at the terrorism one, the homeostasis lesson. I've looked at the lightning rod lessons to find out that.
So you've looked at 3 out of 1,600?
How many have you read?
I haven't read. So you know why?
So I shouldn't be saying what I'm saying without reading them, but it's okay for you to ban them without reading
No,
them.
because here's my job.
Now we're figuring out this discussion
No,
part.
here is my job. My job as chairman of education is to take testimony from parents or teachers or superintendents or State Board of Education members that come to me with issues. And we look at that issue. And we take the evidence and we go from there and we write legislation around it. And based on the sample lessons that we had, our committee voted out unanimously that all these lessons should be reviewed. Obviously, you don't have the time to read 1,600 lessons. and I don't have time to read 1,600 lessons, but my point is, you defended these lessons from day one and never looked at them. I never defended those lessons, and I never attacked those lessons, and I did study the lessons that were presented to me. So have I...
You said you never attacked the lessons? Do we need to go back to the video and the audio of you attacking these lessons?
I never attacked the lessons until I read them and saw what was in them. You have defended them without reading them.
In fairness, what he said was he didn't defend the lessons, but that you did without reading them.
You defended them without reading them.
I've defended local districts and parents to make that decision, Senator. And if a district doesn't want to use it, that's fine. I've defended the lessons that you've taken out of context and said what you're saying is not true about them. We're not teaching our kids to be terrorists. We're not teaching our kids to hate America. And the lesson does not say the Boston Tea Party members were terrorists. It just doesn't say it. You can keep repeating it, but it's still not the truth.
Do you think it's a good idea to plant a seed in the minds of a high school student, even if it's the way England was looking potentially as the lesson plan purportedly was written, that somehow the founders of this country are the same as 3,000 people that were killed at the hands of 19 terrorists? Do you think there even should be a connection there? Explain that to me, Mr. Ratliff.
I will. I'd love to. We talk about all the time that our kids, our students, are competing on a national and global scale for jobs. And if we teach them that everybody views everything that happened in the world the same way Americans do, we're setting them up to fail. I would imagine that Pearl Harbor is taught differently in Japan than it is in the United States. But we don't want to talk about it here. But they don't view it the same way. And if that student goes to Japan as a businessman or woman, they need to understand not everybody sees the things the same way they do.
So, are you saying...
Dig a hole and live in it.
Would you please...
Well, Senator Patrick is... Well, let me throw something in.
Would you please quit insulting the parents and the taxpayers? I don't insult. Please.
I didn't realize I was insulting. If that was insulting, I apologize.
Now, and by the way, I hope we don't have a lesson plan that says our brave Marines who took on the shores of Guadalcanal, I hope we don't have a lesson plan that says they were like the Japanese that attacked Pearl Harbor. I hope we don't have a lesson plan. And let me tell you something else, Mr. Ratliff. Back in 1995, before Senate Bill 1, which was authored by another Ratliff who was a senator at that time, your father, the SBOE could evaluate textbooks on the quality of the content, not just on errors. And in 1995, SB 1 changed that, so that no longer could our State Board of Education look at the quality of content. Now, under the new bill, Senate Bill 1474 by Bob Duncan, the SBOE can now look at the quality of content. You went last week and raised a question on should the SBOE be looking at the quality of content. And I don't understand that, because parents expect us not just to have the lessons mistake-free, and there are always going to be mistakes, but to the best of our ability to be mistake-free, but our parents and our taxpayers expect a quality of content in these lessons, which you apparently don't agree with. And that is part of the problem, because had that lesson on the Tea Party Patriots been reviewed by an outside source, I think someone would have said, you know what, do we really want to associate our founding fathers who threw some tea in the harbor with 19 terrorists who killed 3,000 men and women? I don't think that's a good idea.
Is it not possible, Senator, that somebody might have reviewed that and says one man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, and that's what those people were?
I don't consider our founding fathers
To be freedom fighters?
to be terrorists. And that's what you were trying to make.
Well, he's talking about his perspective.
I know he's talking about his perspective.
And that's where that question goes to.
And that perspective, again, is not subject matter that is being taught to students in a way that they can understand. I'm sorry, Scott, the very fact that you want to connect or think it's okay to say our patriots were terrorists, I'm sorry, I'm not buying it. We were, just on the record, let's be sure our students know that we were trying to break away from a king for freedom, and terrorists came here to kill Americans. There's a big difference, and that's how the lesson should be taught.
Go to to tab 16. The whole terrorism lesson is in there. Read it for yourself and see if you become a terrorist overnight.
You're missing the point.
To Mary Ann Whitaker for the next question.
Senator Patrick.
Yes, ma'am.
The nonprofit TESCCC, which is the group overseeing CSCOPE,
Yes.
was approved by the Secretary of State in accordance with all applicable laws and procedures. The intent was to provide curriculum services and documents for school districts, charters, and even private schools, especially those with limited resources. Agreements between the districts and the service centers established a proprietary protocol allowing parents and community members to view the content as well as the website as long as they were in the presence of an authorized user. That is, if the school policies permitted it. The attack against CSCOPE began when a non-parent wanted access to CSCOPE outside the scope of the agreement and the personal gain and for personal or commercial purposes. On February the 8th, you met with the directors of the TESCCC and you threatened to kill the entire CSCOPE management system unless the directors agreed to certain demands. And these were your demands. Dissolve the nonprofit status of TESCCC. Move the CSCOPE curriculum to a public website. Give teachers full editing rights with all lessons. Request a review of all lessons by the State Board of Education. And agree to a joint press release regarding these changes. The directors agreed to all of your demands in hopes of saving some of the components of the system. This agreement did not include, nor did you request, total censorship of the lesson plans. The agreement did not create legal repercussions if districts continue to use the lesson plans. This agreement never received legislative hearings or approval. At the end of the session, as you have said, Senate Bill 1406, supported by the House and the Senate, signed by the governor, did not censor CSCOPE lesson plans. This bill merely required the State Board of Education to review the CSCOPE lessons in the same manner as other instructional materials. Senate Bill 1406 would have brought to light the quality of the lesson plans, disproving the anti-Christian, anti-American accusations, as well as negating the secret agenda to integrate the Common Core into Texas schools. Senator Patrick, why did you intervene and stop this process, insisting on the total censorship of CSCOPE rather than supporting the legislation that had passed that could have validated or refuted the attacks against CSCOPE?
I'm not sure, to be very candid, I'm not sure I understand the question. Why did I do what?
Why did you intervene and stop the process
What
of the
process?
State Board of Education reviewing the lessons, which should have been done and completed
No.
this summer?
Well, and I really like you a lot. You're a really good person, and we work together hard. You're just wrong on that. I did not intervene to stop the process. Senate Bill 1406 passed, and then CSCOPE voted 18-2, the board, to stop selling the lesson plans. And that stopped the process. Had they not pulled the lesson plans themselves and agreed not to sell them, that was their situation. They came to Senator Duncan and I. They called us. They were so upset themselves. Some courageous board members of CSCOPE said, Senator, this is a mess. We're going to stop licensing the lesson plans. Once the lesson plans were no longer in existence, there was no reason to review something that would no longer be in existence.
So there was no conversation between you and Chairman Cargill to take that item off of their agendas or to disband the committee to not review the lesson plans? Because once again, the bill did not censor lesson plans, and the agreement just said the CSCOPE would no longer be writing lesson plans.
Right.
It did not address those that had already been created.
I can't recall a specific No, stop. You know, it's really not appropriate, quite frankly. I mean, we're trying to answer questions the best we can. And what I'm sharing with you, I do not recall any conversation with her to not do it. I think on her own, she knew there was no point in doing it because there were no lesson plans. They were out of the school. But I can't remember specifically, but I did not get involved in that process. There were no lesson plans to be reviewed because we thought it was over until late July when a lawyer said, public domain, they can still use them. And then Mr. Ratliff saw that as a green light to bring CSCOPE back full speed.
But sir, none of the agreements addressed doing away with the lesson plans. It just said they would not be creating any more.
When you've licensed the lesson plans for years to schools, and you say, starting September of 2013, we're not going to license them to you anymore, then you can't use them. It was over. That's why 25 districts asked for waivers, and they were turned down. It should have been over. It's turned out. It's not. And that will be addressed. I had a bill in the special session. Unfortunately, it didn't pass, but I think it will now be addressed by legislators in 2015. That simply says any lesson plan written before August 31st of 2013 cannot be used in a school. And it will be over. Because let me tell you something. The legislature is upset about what has happened because they represent the people. And the people have spoken out. And I view it again. There are lots of things in life you have a right to do, but is it the right thing to do? And this is the case of the parents have spoken, the teachers have spoken, the legislature has spoken, and now someone wants to go ahead and do it regardless. And the question I have for you is why?
So if you have a community that supports CSCOPE and they're happy with the lessons, you're saying that those parents should not be heard?
No, I think those parents will be heard at school boards. Because now it's in the hands of the parents until we address this either through the courts or through more legislation. And the truth is, most people watching this tonight or listening online haven't heard a lot about CSCOPE. They don't really know a lot about CSCOPE. They don't know. There were a few, and when Mr. Ratliff said earlier, a non-parent, as if a taxpayer doesn't have a right to see. But you are correct. The law says a parent can request it.
All right.
So parents have requested that.
Mr.
And so if parents want to do that and let their schools teach it, but I think after tonight a lot of parents are going to say exactly what's going on here.
Mr. Ratliff, please tell me there's a tab for this.
There is a tab.
Do you have something?
Notice what he says, that those local communities can choose that until they come back next session or go to court to try to stop you from having that choice. So listen real closely. You got that choice now, but he's not done yet. So he's coming soon to a town near you with another frivolous lawsuit. So we're talking about this agreement between the regional service centers and you, Senator. And during session, you were very critical. You're still critical about them doing business behind closed doors.
Right.
And I agree with you. Taxpayer dollars ought to be done in a transparent manner. So why then, at 12:57 a.m., did you email the regional service center guys and say, is it safe to conclude that you have the votes to pass this on Friday? So are you asking them to violate the Open Meetings Act and agree to something before they have a meeting in public?
Into our discussion now.
There is, first of all, there was no agreement. There was no let's sit down and work this out. There was the meeting in my office that I referred to earlier that the Attorney General wrote to the state auditor that he sent one of his top attorneys to my office to talk with, not about the lesson plans, but try to get some answers about some contract issues. Because we have to operate under the law as a public entity. And out of that meeting, let me finish please. So out of that meeting, it was clear that I think the CSCOPE board realized, and their attorney, they had some problems because, as the Attorney General says, it turns out that the TESCC was not writing the checks. The individual regional service centers are writing the checks, and they are public entities. And they didn't have bids, and they didn't have a contract. And folks, if you're willing, those of you who support CSCOPE are willing to begin to let your government just spend money without any bids and without any contracts, then you're going down a very dangerous road.
The question,
Out of that meeting,
question was,
Mr. Ratliff, and I'll answer your question. Okay. So I was called to Senator Bob Duncan's office because one of the board members, Kyle Wargo, is from that area. I went up to the office and he said, Senator, what would you think if we quit licensing and writing lesson plans? I said, that would be a great thing. And he said, well, we have a board meeting next Friday, and I'm going to see if I can get the votes to do that. And I said, great. There was no agreement. There was no quid pro quo. There wasn't anything in return. And he said, my problem is that I'm afraid between now and next Friday, if the word gets out, there'll be so much pressure, some of my board members might not stick. And I said, well, that's up to you. And I said, the best way to do it is have them sign a letter, and once they've signed on the letter, I believe they'll keep their word. And so he contacted me on Sunday night. He worked all weekend, Tom, to get signatures. And the email between, I don't know if he sent it to me or I sent it to him, I just wanted to know if he had the signatures or not.
All right. So is that satisfactory to you?
Well, sure, it confirms, tab 13, by the way. It confirms that you saw the deal, and in fact, it says in your email, it's a good letter. I do have one suggested change to the letter to help clarify a sentence. Is it safe to conclude that you have the votes to pass this on Friday? So it's okay for them to operate in secret when they're doing things you like, but it's not okay when they're doing things...
operating in secret. Give me a break.
They're gathering signatures to pass something without a public meeting to do it, Senator. How is that not operating in secret?
He asked, the board meeting was a public meeting, I believe. I'm not on the board. It was a public meeting. I just asked him a question. Do you have the signatures to pass the bill? There's nothing in secret about that.
And how's he supposed to answer that without polling the members to see if he has the votes?
He had already done it on his own. He volunteered to do it.
Oh.
He volunteered to do it. Do you understand? He came to me and said, I'm going to get the signatures. Okay?
Then he violated the Open Meetings Act, and he should be held accountable for that.
I don't know that he didn't violate the Open Meetings record, to my knowledge.
You've got a very different understanding of the Open Meetings Act than I do, Senator.
Well, you weren't concerned about it for 6 years with Cscope. Time to move on?
It sure is. And by the way, he's in the Senate, and they do everything behind closed doors in the Senate, right? I mean, it's different. It's different.
Because it doesn't apply to them. That's why he doesn't understand it.
As I said, Tom, you're a very bright guy, but you have personalized this for the last 6 months. It's unfortunate. This is a serious issue.
You're right, it is.
And with that, Joanne Fleming with the next question.
Mr. Ratliff, in reviewing the public record of the March 2013 SBOE hearing to take testimony on Cscope, we find that you were not present to find out what was in the curriculum management system, the lessons, and the assessments. You have obviously expressed some very strong feelings about the criticism of Cscope by teachers, parents, and taxpayers. In fact, in the July 17th edition of the Texas Tribune, you are quoted thus: "This artificial controversy has gone on too long without someone at the state level taking charge and performing a review of these lessons and separating myth from reality and education from politics. Please help us understand your July 17th statement to the Texas Tribune in the context of your absence from that initial review back in March."
Well, I appreciate that. You don't have to be in the room to watch the hearings. We do broadcast them on the internet. And I do trust the committee members that are on that committee. Tom Maynard chairs that committee, and he's a very capable guy. He's president of the State FFA Association. So I don't, unlike some people, don't feel like I need to micromanage and sit in on every meeting of all 15 State Board of Education members. So my comment on July about the myth from reality is the very thing I'm talking about. The fact that we want to say that Cscope is teaching our kids that Boston Tea Party was communist, that it's pro-Islamic, that it teaches girls that throwing up is good for their body. All these things that are out there have a grain of truth that they turn into Normandy Beach because they exaggerate it so grossly. And it scares parents and it scares kids unnecessarily. That's the myth from fact. Are there mistakes in Cscope? You bet. Are there mistakes in every lesson or every tool in the classroom? You bet. Are there mistakes in the Texas Senate or the State Board of Education? Absolutely. There is no such thing as an error-free human being. So, there are some mistakes. They have been clarified, or they're old lessons. There are some myths out there. They're on this Dropbox. Go read them. Don't take my word for it. Don't take his word for it. Read the lessons for yourself. Look at them. Talk to your teacher. Don't take my word for it. There are hundreds of thousands of teachers that teach these lessons every day. Do they read them verbatim? Absolutely not. Senator Patrick showed amazing confidence in that teacher in Blanket ISD that did that study. But you don't show the same confidence in all the other teachers to use discretion, to use CSCOPE appropriately in consistent with their values in their community.
You know, I'm really confused here because some of the loudest voices that we heard against CSCOPE were teachers.
Yes, thank you.
That felt like they had no freedom in the classroom, that they had no choice what to teach. Testimony, the principal said, you will follow this lesson plan or else.
And I oppose that 100%.
I'm glad that you do. And so, when you get back to the local control issue, it should be a local control issue of a parent having a right to know what's taught in that class. And a local control issue, I do trust teachers. We have 330,000 teachers in the state. Are they all great? No. But we have some great teachers, and the ones who aren't great work their heart out every day. And one of the reasons we reduced the STAR test from 15 to 5 and put flexibility in the curriculum was to give teachers more time to teach. By reducing 10 STAR tests, we set the benchmark at no more than 2. We're going to eliminate 40 to 50 teaching to the test days over 3 years in high school. So this whole CSCOPE issue, not just for the parents, it's for the teachers. But remember, it's back to the students. And the question that Joanne asked you, again, you have been a staunch defender of this program without having a password, without reading the lessons, without attending the meetings, and you say that you're just defending your local school districts. I understand that, and I appreciate that. But you don't seem to be concerned, again, about these core issues. The core issue of why was it set up? Why was it behind the wall? Why couldn't people see it? Why in every committee meeting when we brought up a problem did they say, oh yes, we'll fix it? And as Ms. Whittaker said, when I sat down with them at the table, you know what the real the beginning of that conversation was? And Senator Seliger was there with me. I brought another senator in. I said, if you all don't address these issues, the whole regional service center network is going to collapse. Now, there's some in the legislature that are already in favor of that, and there are others who may be more in favor of that. And I think one of the reasons that they pulled down the lesson plans is they saw what was happening. And so I asked them, you read the list off. Does anybody not agree with what I asked them to do? Close down the nonprofit? Make all the lesson plans available? That's what we would want. Make all the records available. And you keep going back to these few lesson plans. If you go back, I don't have a Dropbox, but you can go back to the archives of January 31st and watch. Go back to January 31st, go on the Texas legislature online and look at the hearing. It's easy to find, the video. Just watch the hearing. Spend a couple of hours to watch that hearing. And you're going to say, who were these people and what were they doing? They couldn't answer a basic question. And I didn't start out, Tom, with the Tea Party lesson. I didn't start out with the Islam lesson. And the communist flag lesson came to us in testimony. We didn't even know about that one. I just started out on the business side of this issue. Because, Tom, our roles are a little different. You do, as you described your role before. But my role as a state senator and the chairman of education is to look out for 5.2 million students in the state of Texas and 8,500 school campuses and 330,000 teachers and 50% of the statewide budget. That's what we spend on education. I have a responsibility to make sure no one is spending your dollars illegally. I have a responsibility to make sure that there is no indoctrination, if there was an indoctrination, of some specific bias into a classroom, to at least check it out. I've never said there wasn't until we look at the lessons. We won't totally know. But I'm doing my job. And my wife said to me when I took on chair of education, she said, as a longtime teacher, why do you want to do this? At the end of the day, everyone's going to be mad with you. And I said, at the end of the day, if the teachers and the superintendents and the parents like a lot of what we've done, and maybe don't like some of what we've done, then I've done my job. Because my job is to not make everyone happy. My job is to get to the bottom of the truth on every issue And that was the job of our committee. And I was not a lone ranger on this. I don't take credit for it. Our entire committee supported the work. The entire Senate supported the work.
Well, and it was because
That should tell you something.
Because it was about transparency, right?
Because
there were all of these parents who were saying, I can't get the information about my kids and what they're learning.
Well,
right? Whether or not, like you said, whether or not there was indoctrination or not. And Mr. Ratliff, that seems to be, and imagine this, like you say, there was a time before any of this even was political. It was just parents who were concerned, right? There were a lot of people who were upset about the fact they just couldn't find out what was going on. Isn't that the most valid criticism of how this has all unfolded?
Absolutely, and I agree with that, and mission accomplished.
okay. And
The subscriber agreement's been changed, the lessons are all online, mission accomplished. But like any government program, it has to keep going. Instead of saying, we've done what we said we wanted to do, is to give parents access, the auditor's going to look into it, so I would propose that we stop talking about financial misdealings until the auditor does their job. And we don't need a State Board of Education determining what's quality or not. We need a State Board of Education to say, does it cover the TEKS, and is it error-free? School boards, teachers, and parents can determine if it reflects the values of their local community and what they need for their employers and their community colleges and their Tier 1 universities.
And here's what I would ask you to do. Since you seem to approve of all the work our committee did, I mean, which I appreciate because we worked hard on it.
Not everything.
What I would ask you to do, instead of going out there and saying, Cscope or bust, we're going to have it, we're going to show them, why don't you agree to take a deep breath and ask your school superintendents across the state to take a deep breath. Let's step back. Let's see where the audit leads. Let's see where, now that we're actually enacting 1406, let's see where that leads. Let's look at some full qualitative studies, or are these good for our kids or not? Instead of, and I'm okay with it, instead of challenging me or challenging parents, let's work together and be leaders and make sure that what's in our classroom is the best for our students and our teachers. At the end of the day, Thomas, that's the only thing that counts.
Right, and you agree.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll tell you what, I'll cease and desist if you will agree today that you will no longer push for the elimination of the CSCOPE lessons. If it's about transparency, you've accomplished that. But do you want to keep going and censor them and take them out?
I don't know where the word censor came from. That sounds like a talking.
Eliminating something is pretty much censorship.
Here's what I'm saying, is that based on what we know, and we only know a little, there are lots of problems. And if I were a superintendent, I'd be very concerned about what is there that I don't know. If I were parents, I'd be going to my school board and say, let's take time out for a year here. Let's give the, it was over, but now that it's not over, in part because of your actions and one attorney's view of public domain, let's just take a time out and stop. And let's see where all of this continues to lead. But as of today, I have to tell you, Thomas, if the CSCOPE proponents are going to say, we're going forward no matter what, then I'm going to continue to push to see that that ends, because we do not go blindly down the road and say, I like CSCOPE no matter what, my schools are going to use it, my kids are going to learn it, and we don't care what the teachers think, we don't care what the legislature thinks, we don't care what the parents think. That's not how it works in the Texas legislature, Thomas.
And that's not how it works in reality either.
Mr. Ratliff, I still have a little bit of trouble understanding the issue that when the State Board of Education, of which you are an elected member of, has a hearing, there has to be a purpose for that hearing. It's in the public interest that they hold that hearing. I don't believe that the State Board of Education is in the habit of holding a hearing that is beyond its statutory charge.
I beg to differ. But
Well,
keep going.
Okay, well, then that would be a whole nother problem, Mr.
You
Ratliff.
better believe it, and I want to stop it. That's why
Okay,
I
so
ran for
here's
it.
my question about the word micromanagement, and I'm going to try really hard not to editorialize on this. But as a taxpayer, and as a taxpayer and a parent, I have to say that elected officials who make statements that a controversy is artificial, when there are numbers of your constituents that believe that this is a vital issue that needs to be debated, sir, I would say that calling it an artificial controversy when you weren't there to exchange. I understand that you all can watch a hearing remotely. I even have a problem with that. I think if the State Board of Education has a hearing, everybody should be seated in the seat.
Joanna, what's
So,
your question? I'm sorry.
my question is, why is it that it would have been micromanaging for you to have been there to hear the testimony in that first hearing way back in March?
First, because I don't sit on that committee. And there are a lot of bills that come to the Senate floor that Senator Patrick votes on that he doesn't sit in the committee meeting because he's not on that committee. So I don't feel the need to ride herd on other committees at the State Board of Education, nor do my colleagues feel the need to come into the committee that I sit on and make sure we're doing our job.
Okay, may I ask you another question?
Sure.
My
If
question
Scott will
then
let you.
is
That'll be it, yeah.
that once you, but before you make statements about something that came out of a committee hearing, before you make statements calling something an artificial controversy, did you go back and did you review the testimony in the March 2013 State Board of Education? Did you do due diligence?
No, I talk to people that live in my district, that people that can't take a day or two off work to come to Austin to testify.
All right, we're going to move on to our next question now. One more question from each of our panelists, and we'll go back to Superintendent Lee.
Senator Patrick.
Yes, ma'am.
Based on an earlier statement you made regarding CSCOPE, the reason that this became such an issue at the state level was because parents were unhappy with a couple of lessons and they brought it forward. So based on that fact, any parent in any school district, CSCOPE or non-CSCOPE, if they have a problem with a lesson, then from this point on, we've pretty well opened the door. They can bring it to the state level for it to be addressed at a state level. So,
That's
over
not,
I'm not through.
finish your question.
I'm not through. Over the last several months, you have made statements regarding monitoring curriculum across the board. You have stated the state will have to create a plan to monitor online materials. The state is going to have to come up with a model in the legislature to address review of all instructional materials, and you would like to see the state take a more active role in curriculum. Now, under the current law, the State Board of Education sets the standards, the legislature decides how to test those standards, and local districts determine how to teach those standards. It's called local control of curriculum. According to your statements, it appears you want to eliminate parents, teachers, and local school boards from all aspects of the curriculum process, creating state schools with state standards, state assessments, and now state-mandated lesson plans. Would you explain the justifications for these intended initiatives and how the state is going to monitor what is being taught in every classroom in Texas on a daily basis and the projected cost for this bureaucratic plan?
You asked the toughest questions in the nicest way. First of all, I think what you're saying, not intentionally, is totally out of context, and I will explain. But to your first question of, does that mean any time a parent comes to me or any chairman with an issue that we're going to have a hearing on it? No, of course not. However, I was given reams of documents. And that's why, again, in my first hearing, I didn't focus on the Tea Party or the Islamic lesson. That came up in the hearing later. But the documents that I was concerned about were the minutes of the meetings. The documents I were concerned about were the people who tried to attend a CSCOPE meeting and were denied. In fact, again, back to Senator Bob Duncan, who was a mild-mannered senator who was sitting 2 seats from me, wondering what is this all about. He finally, again, if you go to the archives, not the Dropbox, the archives are more fun to watch tapes, to January 31st, And one of the CSCOPE board members had just finished testifying that the meetings were open to everyone. People were welcome to come. And then Peggy Venable came up to testify. She works with Americans for Prosperity, and she handed us an email from one of the board members who was conducting the meeting, denying her access to the meeting just 2 weeks sooner. And that even got Senator Duncan exercised. He's pretty cool and calm. And so what happened during the process, again, when people came to me with minutes that concerned me, I asked the question, how was this formed? And then when I tried to find a phone number for CSCOPE and it didn't exist, this nonprofit, the TE that we've talked about so much tonight, I mean, it was a company, folks, that it didn't exist. Does that not matter to anyone? That was built upon with your tax dollars? And the employees there were public employees? And so, again, I don't know that everyone, maybe I just haven't communicated well enough tonight, and if so, I take responsibility for that. But do you understand that my concern and the concern of the Senate, which we must have, was that a phony company was set up for a reason still unknown to shield parents from seeing what was going on. And that raised questions, as Scott said, of transparency. And that's when every senator said, what's going on here? And that led to all of these questions. And so that's the reason. It wasn't one thing, Mary, that someone brought. It was the preponderance of evidence and then that day of testimony. Now, to your second question, here's what all of you should leave here tonight thinking about. We are, and I believe in online learning. I think it's a powerful tool. But we are entering an era where anything can come into your child's classroom from anywhere today. I think